You've heard of the 12 apostles, but what if I told you their deaths were more brutal and more mysterious than you've ever imagined? Skinned alive, crucified upside down, but one didn't die at all. Why did simple men choose torture over silence, and what truth were they willing to die for? 12th, Judas Iscariot, the betrayer, circa 33 AD. He walked with Jesus. He saw miracles no human eye had ever seen. He heard the parables from the mouth of the Messiah himself, and yet he became the symbol of betrayal for all of history. Judas Iscariot. The name alone stirs something. He was trusted, respected, chosen, but also corrupted, broken, tempted. The Gospels tell us he sold Jesus for 30 pieces of silver, a price so small it was the cost of a slave. But what pushed him to that point? Was it greed, disappointment, or something darker, something he couldn't control? At the Last Supper, Jesus told him plainly, "What you are about to do quickly." And with a kiss, he sealed the fate of the Son of God. But Judas didn't escape the weight of what he'd done. Consumed by guilt, he tried to return the silver. The priests refused, and Judas, lost, isolated, took his own life. One gospel says he hanged himself. Another says he fell in a field and his body burst open. The place became known as Akeldama, the field of blood. But here's the question that still haunts scholars and believers alike. Did Judas truly understand who Jesus was? And if so, was there still a chance for forgiveness? His death remains one of the most tragic, not just because he died, but because of why he died. 11th, James the Greater, the first apostle martyred, circa 44 AD. He was one of the very first to follow Jesus. James, the son of Zebedee, and as James the Greater, was bold, passionate, and part of Christ's inner circle. He witnessed moments that most never did: the raising of Jairus' daughter, the transfiguration. He was there, in the Garden of Gethsemane, just before Jesus was arrested. But about a decade after the resurrection, in Jerusalem, his life came to a sudden and violent end. King Herod Agrippa, eager to gain favor with the Jewish leaders, began persecuting the early followers of Christ, and James was the first target. No trial, no defense. The book of Acts tells us plainly, he had James, the brother of John, put to death with the sword. Some believe he was beheaded, others say he was stabbed. But what's certain is, James became the first apostle to die for the faith. According to early church tradition, the soldier who led James to his execution was so moved by his courage and peace that he confessed faith in Christ on the spot and was executed alongside him. Think about that. A fisherman from Galilee, dying with such conviction that he converted his own executioner. What kind of faith turns death into testimony? 10. Philip, faith in the face of the impossible, c. 54 to 80 AD. Philip wasn't a man of many words in the Gospels, but when he did speak, it always revealed the human struggle with faith. When Jesus faced a hungry crowd of 5,000, Philip looked at the situation and said, 8 months' wages wouldn't buy enough bread for each to have a bite. He saw the problem. Jesus saw the miracle. After the resurrection, Philip became a missionary, traveling far beyond Judea into Phrygia in Asia Minor, where he preached in the city of Hierapolis. There, his message clashed with pagan leaders and Roman authority. He performed healings, cast out spirits, and drew crowds, too many crowds. He was arrested, but tradition tells us he was crucified upside down. But before dying, he preached from the cross. And here's where it gets even more powerful. Accounts say that Philip's words moved the crowd so deeply that they demanded the release of his companion, and he was spared. Philip's death wasn't just a martyrdom, it was a sermon preached in blood. Why would a quiet, calculating man face death without fear? Maybe because after witnessing a man rise from the dead, he knew death wasn't the end. 9. Matthew, the tax collector who was transformed circa 60 to 70 AD. He was hated by his own people, a tax collector, a collaborator with the Romans. To many, Matthew was a traitor long before Judas. And yet, Jesus saw him sitting at his booth and simply said, "Follow me." No lecture, no judgment. And Matthew got up and never looked back. He later wrote one of the 4 Gospels, a detailed account that still guides millions of believers today. But his transformation didn't protect him from danger. According to ancient Christian sources, Matthew traveled to Ethiopia, where he continued to preach, baptize, and celebrate the Eucharist. And it was during one of these celebrations that he was stabbed to death with a sword. Some say it was ordered by a local king who felt threatened by Matthew's message, a message that spoke of a kingdom greater than any earthly throne. He didn't die as a tax collector. He died as a witness, as a preacher, as a saint. What kind of transformation can turn a greedy official into a martyr? Maybe the kind that only happens when you've looked into the eyes of the Son of God. 8. James the Less, a silent but steadfast witness, circa 62 to 66 AD. He wasn't loud. He didn't lead crowds or write a gospel, but James the Less, also called the son of Alphaeus, was there, quietly faithful from beginning to end. A man of few words, yet deep conviction. Tradition says he became the Bishop of Jerusalem, a city filled with tension, politics, and persecution. He was known for his holiness, his fasting, and his wisdom. But in a time when truth was dangerous, even silence wasn't safe. According to early Christian writers like Hegesippus, James was taken to the pinnacle of the temple in order to publicly deny that Jesus was the Messiah. He refused, so they threw him down. When he hit the ground, still breathing, they stoned him, then beat him with a club until he died. It's said that while dying, he prayed for his killers, a man the world barely noticed, but heaven surely received. Why does his story matter? Because not every disciple needs a spotlight. Some of the most powerful testimonies come from those who simply remain faithful, no matter the cost. 7. Thomas, from doubt to devotion, c. 72 AD. He's remembered for one moment, a moment of hesitation. Unless I see the marks in his hands, I will not believe. And just like that, Thomas became the doubter. But doubt is not the end of faith. Sometimes it's where faith begins. When Jesus appeared and showed his wounds, Thomas fell to his knees and said, "My Lord and my God." That declaration, raw, real, complete, launched him into a life of fearless mission. According to ancient tradition, Thomas traveled east all the way to India. He preached, he baptized, he built churches, but his truth didn't go unnoticed. In the city of Chennai, he was confronted by local authorities, and there, he was pierced with spears until he died. A man once skeptical, now shedding his blood for what he could no longer deny. And here's the irony. The one we call Doubting Thomas was the first to proclaim Jesus as God. So maybe he wasn't the weakest apostle, maybe he was one of the strongest, because real faith isn't the absence of doubt. It's what we do after doubt that defines us. 6. Bartholomew, the skinning of a saint, circa 70 to 79 AD. He was known as a man without deceit, honest, faithful, pure of heart. Bartholomew, also called Nathanael, was introduced to Jesus by Philip, and when Jesus told him, "I saw you under the fig tree," his heart opened. He believed instantly. After the resurrection, tradition says Bartholomew traveled far, to India, Armenia, and Mesopotamia, preaching the gospel where no apostle had yet gone. But in Armenia, he faced a king whose heart was not so open. Bartholomew had converted many, including members of the royal family, and for that, the kings ordered a punishment so brutal, even pagan historians wrote about it. Bartholomew was flayed alive, his skin torn off piece by piece, and then crucified upside down. No cries of rage, no begging for mercy, only silence and a faith that would not die, even when his body did. His skin was displayed as a warning to others, but the gospel he preached, that couldn't be skinned away. What kind of inner strength does it take to endure that much pain and still forgive? 5. Simon the Zealot, fired by passion, circa 74 to 80 AD. We don't know much about him, no miracles recorded, no sermons remembered, but what we do know speaks volumes. Simon the Zealot, not just a name, but a title. The Zealots were a radical Jewish movement, fiercely devoted to overthrowing Roman rule. They believed in freedom, and they were ready to kill or die for it. So why would a man like Simon follow a Messiah who preached peace? That's a mystery. He traded rebellion for surrender, violence for compassion, earthly revolution for a heavenly one. After the resurrection, Simon became a missionary, traveling through North Africa, Egypt, and Persia, often with Judas Thaddeus, and tradition tells us he was sawed in half. Yes, sawed, a death reserved for traitors and criminals of the worst kind. We don't know his final words. We don't even know where exactly he died. But maybe that's the point. Simon's life wasn't about fame. It was about fire. A fire that burned not with rage, but with unshakable faith. What could transform a political extremist into a man willing to die for love? 4. Judas Thaddeus, the patron of lost causes, circa 75 to 80 AD. He's one of the lesser-known apostles, but his voice still echoes through time. Judas Thaddeus, also called Jude, son of James, not to be confused with the traitor. This Judas was faithful to the very end. At the Last Supper, he asked Jesus, "Lord, why do you reveal yourself to us and not to the world?" A question born from longing and deep love. After Pentecost, he traveled east to Mesopotamia, Libya, and Persia, spreading hope where hope was nearly gone. Tradition says he and Simon the Zealot preached together, and together they died. Some accounts say they were hacked to death with axes. Others say they were beaten and clubbed by a mob. No trial, no mercy. But here's the twist. Centuries later, people began calling on Judas Thaddeus in moments of despair, when no one else could help, and miracles were reported. He became the patron saint of lost causes, not because he failed, but because even in death, his mission was to restore hope. A man forgotten by history, but remembered by heaven. Could it be that the most overlooked disciple now stands closest to those who feel most forgotten? 3. Andrew, the cross in the shape of an X, circa 80 AD. He was the first to follow Jesus, not through miracles or parables, but through a quiet invitation. Come and see. Andrew, the brother of Peter, was a bridge. He brought others to Christ, including his own family. After the resurrection, Andrew traveled far and wide, Scythia, Byzantium, and finally Greece, planting churches, preaching with boldness, and drawing hearts to the gospel. But not everyone welcomed the message. In Patras, Andrew was arrested for converting the wife of a Roman governor, and the punishment was meant to humiliate him. He was tied, not nailed, to a cross in the shape of an X. They wanted him to suffer longer, and he did, for 2 full days. But during those final hours, Andrew didn't curse or beg or fall silent. He preached to the guards, to the crowd, to anyone who would listen. He called the cross his joy and welcomed death like an old friend. What kind of man calls his instrument of torture his victory? Maybe the kind who once heard a voice say, "Follow me, and I will make you a fisher of men." And he never stopped casting the net. 2 Peter, the rock who fell and rose again, circa 64 to 67 AD. He was the loudest, the boldest, the one who said, "Even if all fall away, I never will." And yet, he did. Peter, the rock, denied Jesus 3 times when it mattered most. But that wasn't the end of his story. Jesus restored him with the question, "Do you love me?" 3 times. And with each answer, Peter was rebuilt. He became the leader of the early church. He preached to thousands. He opened the gospel to the Gentiles. And eventually, he traveled to the heart of the empire, Rome. There, under Emperor Nero, Christians became scapegoats for the great fire. The persecution was merciless. And Peter, the most visible leader, was captured. He was sentenced to death by crucifixion, but he made one final request: "Crucify me upside down. I'm not worthy to die as my Lord did." And so he did, upside down, on Vatican Hill, where today stands one of the most famous churches in the world. Peter died in shame, but with glory, because sometimes redemption means not escaping your past, but facing it, head down, eyes up. 1. John, the only apostle who died peacefully. Or did he? Circa 100 AD, he was called the beloved disciple, the one who leaned against Jesus at the Last Supper, the only one who stayed at the foot of the cross when all the others ran. John, son of Zebedee, witnessed everything: the miracles, the agony, the resurrection. After Jesus' ascensions, John became a pillar in the early church, teaching love, unity, and truth in a world that was anything but peaceful. But his faith came at a cost. According to tradition, he was arrested by the Romans and thrown into a cauldron of boiling oil. But miraculously, he survived without a single burn. Seeing that he could not be killed, the emperor exiled him to the island of Patmos, a rocky prison, isolated and harsh. There, John received visions that would become the book of Revelation, a message of hope, judgment, and the ultimate victory of good over evil. He later returned to Ephesus, where he lived to old age and died peacefully, the only apostle to do so. But some early writings whisper something else, that his tomb was found empty, that perhaps, like Elijah, like Enoch, he was taken. What if the last living witness of Christ's life never truly died? And what if his message of love above all is still the one the church is called to remember? When everything else fades, they were ordinary men who faced extraordinary death. But their stories didn't end in martyrdom, because after the apostles were gone, something else began. A movement so radical, so unstoppable, that even emperors feared it. But buried deep within the early church's history are secrets most people have never heard. Things they didn't teach you in Sunday school, If you thought this video was powerful, what comes next will change how you see everything. Click the next video. You're not done yet.